decided to talk about best angling practices and with considerations for sustainable recreational fisheries today. This is something that I think is relevant to many of you as individual anglers, also as managers and researchers. And it's been the focus of a lot of my research and my supervisor's research. And so this is sort of a culmination of a large body of research that's been building for quite a while now. So catch and release angling is increasing in popularity worldwide, both due to increased as a management strategy, due to slot limits, harvest regulations, and also as conservation ethics by anglers. Regardless of where you stand, I know it's sort of a contentious animal welfare issue, especially in this part of the world. Regardless of where you stand on this issue, increasing in the majority of fish that we actually catch these days are being released. And when we release them, it is a conservation strategy that assumes that these fish are surviving and experiencing limited fitness consequences. And when I say fitness consequences, I mean they have a similar ability to survive and grow and reproduce as they would without being angled. And we know that this isn't always the case. This is a schematic that my supervisor and his PhD supervisor put together in a paper in a catch and release book. Angling involves various stressors. You're hooking the fish, which can cause tissue damage. You're fighting the fish often to exhaustion. This extreme physical exercise elicits a stress response. There's energetic costs involved with this. And then landing the fish. You can remove slime and scales. You're air exposing them. This is a big one. You're exercising a fish to exhaustion and then essentially starting to drown it for a short period of time. And this can result in a whole bunch of fitness effects. The fish could swim away and die hours later, or it could survive and have reduced foraging capabilities, reduced reproductive capabilities, just energetic costs to recovering from this physiological stress. So why this is an issue? I'm sure you're all aware of why this is an issue. Many of you have asked, how much do we know about how many of the fish that we released actually survive? And there's growing concerns. This is a good paper documenting it, that catch and release angling in itself could be contributing to population declines in concert with all the other stressors. It's also an animal welfare issue, of course, as you all know. There's sort of this growing movement, and I know it's quite strong actually in this part of the world, that is anti-fishing. And it's very important that as we represent ourselves as anglers and we grow our angling culture, that we sort of put our best foot forward and sort of minimize the way that the negative impacts that we have in the way that we're viewed. So fortunately, there's actually hundreds and hundreds of papers out there, scientific papers, on best practices for recreational angling. So some sort of generalized guidelines or opportunities for improving fish welfare and survival from catch and release. Minimizing angling duration, minimizing air exposure, selecting appropriate terminal tackle. Circle hooks, barbless circle hooks are generally the best hook to use to minimize gut hooking and injury, and it also helps you take the fish off faster. Also avoid angling in extreme conditions. These could be really high temperatures or habitats with significant predator burden, as well as during the reproductive period. And these are sort of general guidelines, and every fish species has its own susceptibilities and its own characteristics. So some fish are more tolerant to air exposure, while others are not. So it's really it's a species-specific thing, and it's a condition-specific thing. Anglers also have a lot of available tools to them for assessing fish condition, improving fish condition upon release. The most prevalent and useful that I'm aware of is reflex action mortality predictors, or RAMP. These have been tested on a number of different fish species. They're very simple measures that anglers can use to assess the vitality of their fish before they release it. So there's simple things like flipping the fish over and seeing how quickly it can regain its equilibrium. Grabbing the fish's tail and seeing whether it responds, rolling it side to side to see whether it's actually conscious and whether its eyes are tracking you. And so there's 5 main ones that you can use, and there's lots of papers on this. If you're interested, email me. And they provide a lot of the studies. They've been done sort of on a narrow range of species, but every study has shown that it's a really good predictor of fish vitality. It's a good predictor of mortality in a couple of species, and a number of studies have been done that use behavioral impairment and stress physiology sort of as a proxy for mortality. It correlates well with all of these variables. There's also a couple of different types of recovery gear you can use. So when your fish is in bad condition, you can hold it in a live well for a short time period under good oxygen conditions and help it recover. There's also something called a recovery bag. It's just like a simple rubberized mesh bag that anglers can use to hold their fish for a little while it sort of recovers for a little bit. And this is particularly useful in areas that have high predator burden, like marine environments, and also in riverine environments where there's high water flow, and if a fish is moribund for an extended period, it gets flushed downstream. So we have a pretty good idea, really, of how we should be treating fish when we catch them and release them. But how do we actually translate this or confer this information onto the anglers? Regulations are a common way of regulating or affecting angler behavior. And this is certainly central to fisheries management, but best angling practices is something that's sort of difficult to regulate. The anglers are out there, they're doing their own thing. Angling regulations are already quite complex, especially in Canada, and people actually cite this as a reason why they don't fish right now. So adding more complexity to our regulations really isn't something that we're looking to do. We also know, of course, that anglers lie, and anglers cheat, and anglers break laws. Sort of an interesting paper came out of Fish and Fisheries. Actually, both of my supervisors are on this, Stephen Cook and Andy Dalenchuk, on voluntary institutions and behaviors as alternatives to regulations in recreational fisheries management. This is a real growing trend in recreational fisheries. Anglers, especially specialized anglers and young anglers, are becoming very conservation-minded, and they're instituting their own rules as to how they treat their fish. So sometimes they'll have, in certain areas, they'll have closed fishing areas to allow fish to, as sort of a source for the fish population, or they'll self-impose certain gears. This is common in billfish. They often only use circle hooks now. Sorry. So there's a number of different ways that we can promote these best angling practices. I believe it's in Switzerland, you actually have to take a course now when you get your license on angling and how it affects fish. There's of course things like kids fishing days. We've been testing out just over the past year we've been using little Cub Scouts, which is like a club for young children in North America. When you teach children how you're affecting fish and the ways you're supposed to handle fish when they're young, they actually pick it up quite readily, and they realize that fish are something that can sense things and feel things and can be heard. And this will translate into their behavior as they grow up. Things like fishing brochures. There's things like fishing brochures that are out there. Bonefish fisheries. Bonefish is something I study a lot. They're a tropical species that are almost 100% catch and release angling. And bonefish anglers are really conservation-minded people. And one organization has come up with this brochure that actually is distributed to many of the fishing lodges, and all of the anglers get this brochure. And it explains to people what are good things and what are bad things to do with your fish, and how that affects them, how that can improve their survival. Go back now. You also need to consider that, so this is from a study that my colleagues did on Pacific salmon fishery in British Columbia. And they found that, from surveying anglers, that anglers, there's many different types of them. There's ones that, and they sort of categorize them into these 3 different types. There's networking ones, networking anglers that get all of their information through tackle shops. There's traditional anglers that like structured information through pamphlets. And there's investigative ones that spend a lot of time online and actively search out information. So this is something to consider when you're promoting certain fisheries practices, that you have a lot of different types of anglers. The same study also asked, where do you get most of your fishing information? And over 50% of them said the internet. This is, of course, for one specific fishery. I know Sabrina's information is quite different. So, something that's particularly relevant in this meeting is social media, right? It's growing, it's a big part of the internet. So, to talk a little bit specifically about FishBrain. FishBrain, there's many apps like it. I know a number of you have been talking about this, and a lot of them are government instituted. So you can go on there and log your catches, and the government collects the information. The unique part about FishBrain is that it is a cultural thing. You have a profile on there. You follow people. You can become the king of the lake, as Jan was talking about earlier. And so this is an important forum and it's sort of an important melting pot for angler culture. And I went on FishBrain and I pulled up a couple of pictures of people that have posted on there. So you see a lot of really good examples of people considering fish welfare with their pictures. Well, maybe they did it intentionally or not. Taking pictures of fish in their natural environment. Fish are meant to be wet, right? This confers a good message to young anglers who are looking up to the king of their lake and saying, for them to start to realize that fish should be held in water, and this minimizes the effects. There's also lots of people, tons of examples I found of people who aren't using this app in a very sustainable way. And I'm not trying to knock FishBrain in any way. I'm just pointing this out. This is what's going on. So, one thing you can do as you're promoting yourself as an angler, as you're promoting fisheries as a manager, is try to take pictures of fish and show pictures of fish around water, right? You see this fish is dripping with water, just been pulled out of the water. We often take pictures partially in the water, and I think this is a cool way to promote yourself as an angler. So consider as you start to try to grow your fisheries and maintain your fisheries, think about how you're promoting them, how you're promoting yourself as an angler, how you're perceived by the non-angling community, and how we can start to develop an angling culture that's considerate of fish welfare and ultimately is sustainable as catch and release grows. And thanks for your attention. Yeah?
In this data about how the fish respond to catch and release fishing that you were showing earlier, are there done any investigations, especially around spawning periods, whether they're more sensitive pre-spawn, during spawn, post-spawn? Because that's some of the issues. Certain species are closed during spawning season, others are not. And
yeah. Most of the studies have been done around bass. In the Americas, especially in the U.S., a lot of fishing, there is no close season for bass, and bass guard their nest. So there's been tons of stuff done on how negative it is to pull bass off their nest for a short period of time. It often leads to nest abandonment, and it's something definitely to be avoided. Yeah.
It strikes me as generally a freshwater. I basically course fish myself, and that there's a crossover that needs to be made between. I've noticed very big differences in the way that we treat coarse fish over the period that I've been fishing for. You know, the advent of unhooking mats, of even kind of what they call carp care kits, where you treat the fins before they go back into the water. And it seems to me that there's need to think about how we pull those practices from one area to other areas. You know, in terms of, if I look at the way people treat fish in saltwater fishing, it's generally very different to the freshwater, and maybe there's a need to try and cross-fertilise a bit on that.
Yeah, there's definitely different types of anglers for every fishery, and again, different best angling practices for every type of fishery as well. Some fish are far more resilient to air exposure, for example, than others. So, very